Okay, awesome. Well, good afternoon, everyone. For those of you who are on the West Coast, we're very excited for you to join us this afternoon for our corporate innovation webinar. Today, we're specifically talking about startup engagement strategies that work. So oftentimes, corporate teams, corporate innovation teams may be trying to work with the startup, but not know how to work with the startup, or that's failing. And we're going to dive into that today. My name's Tyler Stunkey, the Director of Corporate Innovation here. I've been with Runway for 5 years growing that program. And I'm joined today by my colleague Erica as well, who has a great background coming from Silicon Valley Bank, 8DC, and she's an innovation analyst on our team here for over a year now. So we're really excited to share with you this information. On the next slide, what we're talking about today is specifically in this webinar, how to define your startup engagement goals, how to develop the right engagement strategy for your organization. Every organization is differently, and maybe we can talk about that in the Q&A later. And how to establish a positive relationship to attract high-quality deal flow, so reputations matter. And then how to streamline your startup engagement process to be efficient and effective. And we'll throw in some real-world examples today from our experience and really great examples in the industry. A little bit about what we do here at Runway. So we provide innovation services and full stack capabilities. The first of three things that we do is help you align strategically and educate your teams on innovation. Right? So starting off with a common knowledge of innovation, tools, trainings, culture, methodologies, and helping you create the right plan to effectively achieve your goals. The second thing that we do here at Runway, and we're really focusing on this today, is startup engagement. Right? How to identify the right opportunities in the market, how to then find the right startups globally, then have a conversation to see if they're correct for partnership, then deploy a partnership proof of concept, and ultimately then a full-blown partnership investment or acquisition. So we're really excited about that. And the third piece we do is ecosystem building. So things that may take longer time to see return on investment. We're talking about things like incubation, acceleration, corporate venture capital. All of these things here I've listed are tools within the innovation toolkit that we're happy to work with global corporations on. Some of the corporations we've worked with over 19 global Fortune 500 corporations. You can see some of the logos here on the next slide and some of the companies that we've worked with. Our methodology works across industries. We've worked with over 37 different clients on different projects. We really know startups. We've had the ability to have hands-on with over 20,000 different startups, working with our global corporate clients to help them identify and partner with the right startups. All right. In terms of the agenda for today, I'll briefly go over some of the current challenges in the innovation landscape. My colleague Erica here will take it away with our 5 tips for corporate startup engagement. And here's a little teaser to some of the tips that we'll be going over today with case studies. And then we'll round it out with Q&A. If at any time you have questions throughout the presentation, feel free to throw them in the chat. If they may come in throughout, we might get those at the end. So we might answer those throughout or towards the end, but feel free to throw those questions in the chat. We'll take a look. All right, so why don't we get started? So the current innovation landscape and challenges for corporate innovators. Okay? So it's no shock that it's challenging to innovate within a corporation. Right? There's so many different dynamics. It's very difficult, and the organization itself may be facing a lot of challenges. So why do corporate startup engagements often fail? Well, we're going to go through the top ones here. So the first reason is a lack of strategy. So 19% of corporations have no goals for startup engagement. So this often happens when individuals are trying to be innovative for the sake of marketing or for the sake of optics, where they don't have a specific goal of why they're actually engaging a startup. The next here is poor partner communication. So having one clear point of contact on both sides of the startup and corporate. So 49% of corporations have no clear point of contact defined. An extra tip here is that innovation roles often change. So when we're thinking about having a clear point of contact, if you're moving to another role, pass the POC off and let the startup know who the clear point of contact is. The third is missing metrics and accountability. So 38% of corporations have no impact metrics in mind. So we're talking about, right, how many POCs, what does success look like? How are we going to show ROI for our budgets? All of these things that are crucial when you're going into budget renewals, when you have to go face the executives or the board level and say, what do you do? How can you justify the work that you're doing and how it's growing the organization? And fourth, it is slow to move. And this one's probably not shocking for those of you who are working inside corporations, but 20% of corporations take over 6 months to complete a startup deal. Now, that may actually seem like a fast corporate deal, but for a startup, that is a lifetime, right? In 6 months, a startup might pivot, they might have to raise more money, or they might shut down. So you have to be able to move quickly with startups. When asked in a recent survey, the biggest challenges faced by corporations, a publication Innovation Leader got back these results. The highest ranking was allocation of resources, right? Who's going to be on the projects? You know, how much engineering talent do I need? Who's actually going to be utilizing this budget for innovation across the different teams? So 52% that was ranked from respondents. The next highest was bureaucracy and red tape. So not having the ability to actually get the projects done because of internal alignment, paperwork, making sure that there was just the right processes in place there when it came to politics as well. The next was access to deal flow. So finding the right startups, right? The high quality startups. 41% is actually, this is specific on process. So a little bit difference here between bureaucracy, red tape, and process is what is the step-by-step linear process that we're going to take to actually engage startups and having that documented across business units and across teams. And then the fifth here is lack of support and alignment, right? So we're talking about executive support or business unit support, where someone else from another team might come in and say, you're supposed to work with this startup, but it doesn't actually tie into their goals, into their evaluation criteria. So it's often a challenge. Now, these are some of the ones done by Innovation Leader. In a study done on the next slide by Harvard Business Review, they identified several other challenges. In addition, and some of these might be repeats, right? Politics, turf wars, lack of alignment, right on the money there. The next one we see is a failing to act on critical signals or developments. So this is not having the ability to act upon key trends that we're seeing. The next is a lack of executive support. So we see that one again. So not having the top-down assignment in order to be more innovative. You need those resources and the encouragement throughout the organization. Confusion on where to start in defining key needs. So this is a very important one. Innovation can be quite overwhelming, and there's so many different options in terms of how you can be innovative. So where do you actually start? How do you define the specific projects you're going to start with? You know, of the 100 pain points, what are the 3 to 5 that we're going to accomplish within this next year? Low risk tolerance for trial and error. Now, every company has a different risk tolerance. Some actually, are praised for their risk taking. However, we work with global corporations, and we found that this is very culturally dependent. Right? There's different cultural contexts for risk tolerance and trial and error, and every corporation is different, but this is often an obstacle for innovation. Then working with startups that don't align with your organization. Now, this could be an example of everyone trying to work with a blockchain startup for companies that don't need to be in blockchain. Now, this is a core underlying technology. However, there's a difference between working with technology companies and startups to be flashy versus innovative. So knowing what actually aligns with your core business needs. And then last but not least is the inability to show tangible results. So when we go back to those impact metrics, not being able to show what the program actually accomplished other than some nice pictures. And these are some of the things that we definitely tackle here at Runway. Now, on the next slide, I'll be handing it over to my colleague, Erica. So we talked about the challenges within the ecosystem. Now, Erica is going to talk about some of the tips that we have to combat some of these challenges, and you're in good hands here. So Erica, take it away.
Great, thank you, Tyler. So now that we have some context into why corporates do struggle to engage startups, let's go over some of the top 5 tips for effective corporate startup engagement. Tyler kind of already touched on this earlier during the agenda, but really we've narrowed it down here to 5 top tips for effective corporate startup engagement. The first step that we will cover today is how to adopt the right mindset. From building trust with startups to even learning how to communicate with them, how can we adopt the right mindset to make sure that our startup engagement efforts are effective and successful? Second, we want to define our goals. What are the right questions to ask? How do you outline your objectives? What kind of KPIs should we look at? We'll go over all of these steps soon. The next top tip here is how to develop an appropriate engagement strategy. In order to do this, we want to choose the right form of engagement and determine a partnership that works in the best context of your overall organization. Next, we will need to learn how to create an iterative, streamlined process. This will have fewer frictions and greater efficiencies and create a repetitive framework that you can continue to use as you continue with your startup engagement goals. And finally, we'll cover how to leverage proof of concepts to test experimental ideas. We'll go over everything from sourcing the right startups and having the right deal flow to having productive meetings with startups, and even share a step-by-step guide on how to execute pilots and POCs. All right, so let's get into it. The first step today is how to adopt the right mindset. One great thing to remember here is that mindset matters. Adopting a foundation for solid relationships with startups will have a positive outcome in terms of developing your reputation in the startup ecosystem. So it's very important to make sure that you have this nailed down first. How can we adopt the right mindset? A great first step is to focus on establishing trust. The number one tip we have here is to be transparent. What does it mean to be transparent? Essentially, it comes down to being very upfront about your motivations with the startup. For instance, if your goals are purely exploratory, you will want to communicate this to a startup so they don't have a sense of false hope. If, on the other hand, you do actually see the fruition of a real partnership developing, you want to clearly communicate this motivation as well. Second, you'll want to seek to add value. As a corporate, you know already that there's much to gain from a startup, but you also have much to contribute to the startup in terms of providing value as a corporate. Always seek to kind of put a founder's first mentality and put yourself in the founder or entrepreneur's shoes to understand really where you could provide a value add. Finally, show respect for startups' time. This includes everything such as respecting deadlines, responding to startups in a timely manner, and following up when promised. As you know, founders and entrepreneurs are extremely busy, and you do not want to show a lack of respect for their time by not following up when appropriate. The second mindset tip is to remember that corporate startup engagement should be mutually beneficial. Both corporates and startups have a ton to gain from each other, and they do not necessarily need to compete in the innovation space. Rather, they can coexist and help each other. First, the corporate value add. Big corporates have size and scale and can offer things like marketing exposure, strategic direction, connection, and resources that are tremendously helpful to startups. On the other hand, startups are very agile and innovative, and they can also offer an innovation mindset that corporates may often lack. Another benefit that startups can produce is market knowledge, a new customer base, or even a technology solution to an existing corporate pain point. In an ideal situation, a successful partnership will look like a mutual synergistic relationship and can result in anything from knowledge and network sharing to new products being developed for the market, or even an downright acquisition, which is often very ideal for startups. Step 3 in adopting the right mindset is to diversify your short-term and long-term goals. As you know, engaging with startups can be fairly risky. So it's important to remember the trade-off between short-term and long-term goals when choosing which startups to partner with. For example, if you are seeking an immediate return, you may look to invest in or work with later stage startups that already have some sort of validation in the market. On the other hand, if your goals are more disruptive or you're looking for more moonshot ideas, you might be more interested in working with early stage or even seed companies and seeing what kind of opportunities can develop there. A major tip is to hedge risk when engaging with startups by adopting the sort of portfolio mindset that we will go into later in our next slide. But essentially what you want to do is kind of hedge your short-term and long-term goals and kind of see it as a portfolio relationship in which some of your benefits of investing in short-term visions can offset the risks of investing in these companies. So how do you practice a portfolio approach? Number one tip, increase the number of engagements. The best startups are not working with dozens, but hundreds of different startups. The best corporates are working with hundreds of different startups and working out different pilots and POCs. While it's pretty impossible that all of your startup goals will result in positive outcomes, increasing the number of engagements can increase the probability that some of these will be successful. Next, you want to diversify. Diversify based on use cases, startup stages, and industry. You may also want to diversify based on different outcomes and time horizons. Another great tip is to venture outside of your core competencies. One company that is very good at doing this that we'll cover later is Walmart. But Walmart has invested in startups that are not just in e-commerce, but also in healthcare as they're rolling out their health insurance programs. And so knowing where your core competencies are and also your shortcomings can help you identify exactly where to find new opportunities as well. And finally, learn from your failures. Mistakes are bound to happen, but it's only a waste if you fail to learn from them. So all of these kind of go into practicing that portfolio approach. A great example actually of a company that is working with startups and sort of adopting this founders first mentality is Google through its program, Google for Startups. So Google for Startups essentially was designed to help founders and entrepreneurs build their company with the help of Google's fast, scalable, and reliable infrastructure on Google Cloud. Essentially, the way the program works is that it offers developers and founders cloud credits, access to community events, and training and mentorship programs to equip them with the tools and confidence to scale their business and actually create solutions that can go into the market. So rather than looking to see an immediate financial ROI or even a strategic benefit, Google really emphasizes putting the founder first and focusing on providing startups with value where they might not have it, using the corporate's resources, which startups often lack. So great company working with startups and also growing its reputation in the startup ecosystem. This is from actually their website, just a couple of great success stories, but Google has helped thousands of different startups go to market. Some of their success stories are seen here. Again, demonstrating the immense value that corporates can provide for startups. We wanted to include a quick runway tip here, and that is to remember that reputations matter. The startup ecosystem is notably very intimate. It often consists of a tight network of founders, creators, and entrepreneurs, and word travels extremely fast. So your reputation in the startup community can travel fast. So always remember to be transparent, show founders respect, and value a startup's time because this will pay dividends. All right, let's jump into step 2, and that is defining your goals. So the next step here is to clearly define your innovation goals, ensuring that your objectives are in alignment with the broader objectives of your organization. A great step to start with is to identify your why. So in a recent study of 115 large corporations, when asked about their key motivations for working with startups, these were several of the answers. Number one, 63% of them reported that their main motivation was to launch a proof of concept. Another key motivation was to drive a culture of innovation. We kind of talked about how startups are very agile and corporates can benefit from this sort of mentality. Another great motivation was to understand technology and consumer trends. Another one, license or buy technology. This is specifically if you have existing corporate pain points that the technology that a startup can offer can actually solve. And then fifth, another great motivation was to raise brand awareness in the startup ecosystem and even have sort of an image transfer benefit of positioning themselves as an innovator in the market. So step one is you want to ask your macro level questions to see really what you're looking for in terms of gaining value from your startup engagement. For instance, what do you hope to gain? Again, is it market knowledge, new customers, support to existing business units, or even a new line of business? Identifying this is a great first step to start. Second, does this align with your overall business objectives? Your startup engagement efforts should align with the broader objectives of your organization. And a primary reason for this is to get buy-in and support from your stakeholders as well. You want to show that your innovation efforts are not just a fun project, but actually something that is pushing your business's agenda. Third, do you expect an immediate ROI? This will help you identify what stage startups you'll want to partner with and the engagement format. And finally, is your focus internal or external? A good example of an internal focus might be an existing pain point that the technology that a startup can offer will immediately solve. On the other hand, external benefits might be associated with marketing or brand and image advantages of working with startups and sort of positioning yourself as an innovator in the market. Step two is to perform an objective self-assessment. You'll want to look at your goals and resources to objectively understand what you can afford to invest in your startup engagement activities. First of all, you'll look at things like your timeline. How quickly does management expect to see an ROI on your innovation efforts? Do you have some sort of leeway, or is there an expectation for a rapid ROI? Second, what available resources do I have on hand? Do you already have the human capital set aside to support your innovation efforts, or do you require new hires? Also, how much capital are you authorized to spend? This is often different from a separate corporate venture capital arm that has allocated resources to actually investing in startups. You also want to make sure that you have capital allocated for startup partnership opportunities. And third, your tolerance for risk. How much risk are you willing to take on, whether that be how much you divulge in terms of intellectual property, your risk to your brand reputation if the partnership does fail. Third, after doing an objective self-assessment, you will want to allocate resources and define a clear budget. Again, you'll want to set aside capital commitment. So startup partnerships can use financial resources in a various amount of different ways, one being paid pilots. Other examples are things like the price to host events, or even access accelerators and incubators. Another key thing to budget for is human capital. Often your innovation efforts will require the time and attention of C-level executives, business unit heads, production teams, as well as commitment from perhaps your finance, legal, and strategy teams. Third is time. Startup engagement will often require a significant level of time commitment, and so you want to make sure that you've allocated this as well. And fourth and final is the cost of failure. A failed pilot could potentially negatively impact your image or brand on the market and have an impact on your market performance. So accounting for the potential of this failure is also key. All right, so next is step 4, which is to define an innovation statement. Your innovation statement should ultimately check off 4 main key points. First, it should reflect your objectives. This includes everything, including your mission and vision. Secondly, it should align with your company's goals to provide a sense of internal alignment and gain the support of your stakeholders. Third, it should be realistic. While your innovation goals can be lofty, your goals should be realistic to avoid disillusionment among your stakeholders and gain their support. And finally, they should be actionable. You need to make sure that your innovation goals can capably be implemented. Just a quick tip here is that Runway actually does do workshops where we help corporates design and craft an innovation statement. So we have a template down here that you can kind of get a sneak peek of, but if you're curious to learn more, definitely feel free to reach out to our team. All right, and then step 5 is to define key performance indicators or KPIs. This is relatively subjective and can vary based on the form of engagement or the type of startup that you do choose to work with. It's also important to know that KPIs for your innovation efforts will differ a little bit from KPIs for your actual business goals because they might be a little bit less quantitative and can be a little bit more flexible. However, some key points to look at include the number of initiatives, how many of these initiatives were successfully implemented in the form of a pilot or proof of concept, the media publicity you gained from working with a startup, penetration into new markets, cost savings associated with working with a startup rather than producing the technology in-house, speed to market, sales growth or revenue resulting from the partnership, and finally, knowledge of new consumer trends that you might have gained from this engagement. All right, let's get into another great corporate example. This one is from Capital One, and they have an innovation unit called the Lab. And they really have a great innovation statement and yearly goals that are clearly outlined. So for one, their innovation statement from their website says, at the Lab, we explore the intersection of emerging technologies and finance to build innovative products, consumer experiences, and engineer solutions that advance Capital One as a leader and better the lives of our customers. A couple things to note here is, as you can see, there is some sort of strategic alignment with their overall business goals, wanting to kind of push forward Capital One's position in the market. Also demonstrates a clear vision and also mission in terms of their innovation efforts. Secondly, their yearly goals. So two of their primary goals in terms of their innovation efforts are to launch 50 new projects specifically geared toward finding fintech solutions that are upcoming, and also provide quarterly hackathons. This is also sort of part of their open innovation efforts to gain information and innovation ideas from outside of the organization. So ultimately note that these are all quantifiable, actionable, and realistic goals. Another quick runway tip is to set realistic expectations. Based on a survey of 100 corporations working with startups, 81% of corporations saw fewer than 25% of their pilots turn into commercial deals. That's less than a quarter. So what that means is to not panic if your engagement efforts aren't as successful as you envisioned. Instead, you want to make sure that you set goals to target a greater quantity of initiatives, working with dozens, if not hundreds of startups to sort of adopt this portfolio approach that we've already talked about. All right, the third step is to develop an appropriate engagement strategy that reflects your goals and resources. So really, when determining your engagement strategy, it comes down to your platform and your business focus. So there are kind of two sides of this spectrum. So say here at the top, you have your corporate innovation or corporate strategy team. On one hand, this might be led by your corporate development team, in which case they are more focused on a financial ROI or opportunities for mergers or even acquisitions. So two outcomes here could be either an investment or even an acquisition of the startup. Again, this is more focused on gaining that financial ROI. On the other hand, your innovation efforts might be led heavily more by your strategic team, in which case you're looking for more of a strategic return on investment. In this case, your innovation efforts might be led by your innovation team or your business development team. In this situation, potential outcomes include either industry-specific or future-oriented technology that can help position you as an innovator in the market, or actually business solutions that will solve internal pain points. Step two is to decide on your engagement type. This really comes down to 5 different types of basic decisions. Number one, invest. This is usually done via a CVC or corporate venture capital arm. Another option is to acquire the company or outright buy the startup and integrate it into your existing corporate structure. Another outcome could be to build or even co-develop a technology with the startup. Another option is to buy or simply become a customer of the technology. And finally, partner. And this is something that we're going to dive a little bit more deeper into today. So as this webinar is focused on corporate startup engagement strategies, let's look at the various business models that you can choose when doing a partnership with a startup. So here up top, we have types of partnerships. The first one is a product co-development partnership. This entails essentially building a new product together that previously didn't exist on the market using each of your individual core competencies. Another alternative is a revenue share partnership. This actually is more beneficial in the event that an equity investment might be a bad fit. And in a revenue share partnership, it may look like something like a corporate or a corporate fund receiving disbursements based on the net revenue or net income rather than gaining a fixed equity percentage. Another option is a technology licensing agreement. The upside for the corporate in this case is the right to use the latest technology to build their business. And then on the startup, the upside is a big licensing partner to launch their intellectual property into the market as soon as it's available. Another option is a channel or geographic partnership, in which case a corporate may sell a product or service on behalf of the startup. This has benefits for both, as well as it can help the startup increase revenue and also help the corporate enter new markets. And fifth and final is a joint venture. In this sort of relationship, two entities may work together without having a permanent relationship. So it's definitely different than an acquisition. And in an ideal setup, both parties can benefit from the other's resources and potentially bring to market a greater innovation than they would be able to as separate entities. All right, so let's get into another great corporate example. And this is from the Unilever Foundry. The Unilever Foundry is one of the Unilever's innovation units that is designed to partner with startups to accelerate innovation on a global scale. So this is actually pulled straight from their website, but they clearly communicate their program benefits, partnership opportunities, and expectations to startups. They offer everything from procurement partnerships to marketing partnerships, new product development, joint ventures, etc. And have had quite a bit of success to date. As you can see on the right here, some of their key results include over 200 pilots launched, $20 million pilot investment, and has profiled over 10,000 different startups. So this also kind of demonstrates a portfolio approach in that they are searching and launching pilots with a variety of different startups, not necessarily expecting all of them to work out, but also nevertheless increasing their number of initiatives. Okay, great. So step 4 is to create an iterative, streamlined process. So the advantage of creating a streamlined process are essentially twofold. First, it can facilitate the process of identifying and engaging promising startups. And secondly, it can improve the startup's experience. This in turn will improve the quality of the deal flow that you might receive, as better startups will want to work with you and ultimately lead to a greater network of startups. So step 1 is to delegate roles internally. Despite having corporate innovation teams, many companies lack a central point of authority with their corporate innovation efforts and often struggle to allocate roles and resources appropriately. In fact, there was an interview with Forbes, and a research on Fortune 500 companies showed that more than 50% of surveyed respondents said, "I'm not sure," or "we don't have one," or "we don't have a clear point of contact for interacting with the startup ecosystem." This is extremely problematic both on the corporate side, but also on the startup side, because there is a lack of alignment and also a lot of confusion in terms of who is responsible for reporting and who to communicate with. So one of the key things you want to do is decide on a key decision maker. In addition to your key decision maker, you want to allocate roles accordingly. So a couple of example roles might be someone to be in charge of the startup scouting process, technology testing. We'll talk a little bit more about this when you're creating a sandbox environment to test technologies, maybe a strategic head or lead, and even someone on your legal team to help with the partnership details. Step 2 is to develop a standardized onboarding process. Another key pain point when engaging with corporations from the startup's perspective is the inefficient procurement and contracting process. In fact, according to a survey by Techstars, about 20% of corporations take over 6 months to launch a pilot or proof of concept with startups. So a great key step here is to create a startup outreach draft, which could essentially look like an email template that you might send out to startups that you're potentially interested in working with. Another great one is to have an inbound application process to vet and kind of weed out the startups that you do want to work with, specifically the startups that are interested in working with you as a corporation. Third, create a standard NDA. This will reduce friction when sharing sensitive IP and information regarding current business engagements. And finally, you will want to create a short purchasing template that outlines the terms and conditions of your partnership or agreement. Step 3 is to create a sandbox environment to test your technology, or test the startup's technology rather. In order to do this, it's great to understand what a sandbox is. So a sandbox essentially exists to create a safe exploratory environment to test, demo, or develop a service without disrupting existing systems. So even, for instance, if you have sensitive data that you do not want to be shared, you can make a sandbox of historical data to test the technology. So step 1 in creating a sandbox environment is to design the environment. This includes everything from making decisions regarding the length of the experiment, deciding whether it will be paid or unpaid, determining the relevant product, team, or service line, etc. Also, you will want to align internally. So this includes delegating the appropriate platform to perform the testing and also developing relevant KPIs. Third, you will actually want to test the technology. So learn, demo, develop, and determine the viability of the technology in a secure environment. Fourth, you will want to analyze the success of the experiment based on your KPIs. And finally, you will want to report. So prepare a report that you can share internally and revisit for future experiments. Next, you will want to debrief your key learnings. So the final step in developing a streamlined process is to debrief your key learnings and really hone in on what you learned and make adjustments for the future. So the first step is to analyze your results. You will want to perform a sort of post-mortem by looking at the statistics on how many engagements may have failed and understand whether it was an issue of a strategic alignment and fit or an issue of technology integration. The next step is to identify your key learnings. So you'll want to communicate internally to understand which mistakes were made and understand how to not repeat them. A great tip here is to perform internal surveys in your innovation team to accumulate feedback and also gain more buy-in from stakeholders who may feel like they have a say in your innovation efforts. Third, you will want to communicate internally any changes that you've made and make sure that everyone is aligned internally, as this is a huge issue often with corporate innovation teams. Fourth, you will want to refine your strategy and make sure that these changes can be made in the future so you don't repeat your same mistakes. And fifth is to begin a new experiment, learn from your failures, iterate, and do it all over again. So let's go into another quick corporate example here, and this is on Coca-Cola and their founders program. So Coca-Cola has really done a great job of streamlining a program that creates a win-win situation between both founders, startups, entrepreneurs, and their corporate as a whole. So the way that this system works is they first actually, before even starting with a startup, is search for entrepreneurs. So they will search their networks for either serial entrepreneurs or entrepreneurs with previous exits, and identify the right ones to invite to the network. Second, they will then invite them to join their highly exclusive network, and then allow them to create a new legal entity with 100% of their startup ownership from day one, and essentially set up the startup. Next, they will provide the startup with all the corporate resources. So everything from relationships to mentorships to access to local senior managers, and even availability to access new markets. And then what they will do is once the team validates their business model and the business is ready to scale, Coca-Cola will actually convert the investment into a minority share of equity based on the market valuation of the legal entity. So essentially creating this win-win situation. So the fifth and final step that we will go over is how to leverage proof of concepts to test experimental ideas. So again, what is a proof of concept? By definition, a proof of concept is a process of validation during which startups can seek to demonstrate their viability in the market via real-world applications. Going back to the big picture, the number one reason that corporates do choose to partner with startups is to launch a pilot or POC. And this makes sense because a POC can add a lot of value to both corporates and startups. Specifically for startups, a POC can help them realize if their product or service actually has a practical use case, can offer unique value to its target group, addresses a market demand, or even if it's priced appropriately. So step one is to expand your network to track the right deal flow. Several areas where you can do this include accelerators and incubators, innovation or co-working spaces, corporate sponsored events, and even technology conferences. Now we are aware that many of these technology conferences kind of are canceled or have moved online due to COVID, but there are still plenty of resources and online conferences that are available to actually gain great access and deal flow to startups. Also at Runway, we host a ton of virtual events that can help you as a corporate discover disruptive startups. For example, we work with Pitchforce, which regularly hosts virtual competitions and gives the opportunity for promising tech startups to deliver 4-minute pitches to a panel of seasoned investors. Also, we have coming up on November 18th, a B2B pitch event focused on the empowered workforce theme, where you can discover startups that are working to tackle challenges in skill matching and upskilling the workforce. So that's also available on our website, and there is an Eventbrite link as well if you're interested in joining that as well. Step two is to use a startup evaluation framework to select startups. So Runway has provided a startup evaluation framework example here. And so this can kind of help you identify what kind of startups you do choose to work with and really vet which ones you may not want to or pass on. So one thing that you might want to look at is the startup stage. Are they early, seed, later stage? Have they shown some sort of traction or validation in the market? Again, this goes with your tolerance for risk and also whether or not your goals are short-term or long-term. The second thing you'll want to look at is the problem solution fit. So really seeing whether it directly addresses your business needs. The third is partnership readiness. Again, this goes back to how much validation the startup has had in the market. Another great piece of the framework is to look at the startup's competitive moat. How is it positioned in terms of the competitive atmosphere? Do they have some sort of defensible proprietary information or technology? This also goes along with intellectual property. So does the startup have some sort of patented or pending technology? What is the market opportunity for this startup? A great way to address this is to look at the total addressable market and basically size the market to see how much potential opportunity the startup has to offer. Next is the team. Does the team consist of serial entrepreneurs with previous exits? Are they a technical team? Are they industry leaders? These will all help you decide whether or not you want to proceed with the startup. And finally, the product. Is the technology strong? What are the relevant use cases, etc.? Step three is to make pre-meeting preparations. So going into startup meetings, you will want to make sure that you come prepared and perform the following due diligence prior to the meeting. So a great thing to do is to actually research the startup. This includes doing things like internet research on the startup's website, product reviews, client success stories, competitors, news updates, etc. You will also want to prepare specific due diligence questions. This can include everything from technical questions to project scope questions to scale and capabilities of the startup. You'll also want to have prepared your framework or selection criteria, which we had just gone over, making sure you know exactly what you're looking for when you are choosing which startup to work with. And finally, you want to decide on some potential outcomes that you can offer the startup, whether that looks like a paid pilot, a partnership, an investment, or global rollout, or even a downright acquisition. You can also ask about some of our best practices on cold emails during the initial startup outreach phase, because we have some really great templates as well. And step 4, hold the initial meeting with the startup. So after doing your pre-meeting diligence, you will actually want to meet with the startup. And here is just a quick sample agenda of what that meeting should include. So for instance, you might want to start with a welcome and introduction, just a couple of minutes, who is online, who are the relevant stakeholders, etc. You'll next want to cover your overview of your goals as a corporate and what is your motivation for this engagement opportunity. Next, you will want to discuss the opportunity for the startup. So going over what your corporate value add is and what you can offer the startup. Next, you will want to ask for a startup introduction or demonstration of their product. Many startups are very seasoned in doing this, and so this is just a normal part of the engagement process. Next, you will want to have an open Q&A opportunity where you can both discuss partnership details, and this kind of goes along with this next step here, which is a partnership fit discussion. So understanding where there is sort of a sense of strategic alignment and whether or not the startup and corporate can work together. And finally, you will want to discuss next steps. So the next step here is to have an internal meeting, debrief, and actually select the startups. So really this comes down to 2 main decisions. One is that you do choose to move forward and work with the startup, in which case you will want to schedule next steps. And this should include a technical analysis or a POC scoping meeting. On the other hand, you may choose to pass on the startup. And in this situation, you want to make sure that you are informing the startup promptly. Ideally, this whole process should take a maximum of 7 business days to sort of push your corporate innovation forward, as corporates can sometimes move very slowly, but also to show respect for a startup's time and make a decision quickly. And this is our last corporate example of the day, and it's on Walmart, which is a great example of how it's kind of adopted this portfolio approach to working with startups and launching a variety of different pilots and partnerships. So this is not exhaustive at all, and it's actually just a highlight of some of the recent partnerships that Walmart has launched with some of these startups in either the e-commerce space or even in the robotics or drone delivery space. But even ranging from last mile delivery partnerships, such as those with UDelv and Deliv, middle mile logistics, such as that with Gatik, to even robot stocking shelves, such as Bossa Nova, which was recently terminated, as many of you may know. But Walmart has really been very exploratory in their startup engagement efforts, working with a variety of different pilots and launching a lot of different proof of concepts to see where they might see some technology synergies and also gain access to new customer segments. Another really interesting partnership that Walmart has recently launched is their pilot with Clover Health, which may seem a little bit out of scope and out of Walmart's niche, but as you may know, Walmart is also in the market of delivering affordable health services. And so with Clover Health, they are trying to use Clover Health's data-driven technology called Clover Assistant to help support the healthcare journey of their Live Healthy members to ultimately, as they say on their website, live better, healthier lives. So this is just another great example of how Walmart has been engaging with startups. So final runway tip here is to be persistent. As demonstrated through Walmart's example, pilots and POCs are often bound to fail and can terminate at any time, but it's important to remain persistent throughout this entire process. You kind of want to adopt this startup mentality to remember that failure is a necessary part of the process, and if used effectively, it can only benefit your engagement initiatives by providing you with key lessons moving forward. So always be persistent and be okay and comfortable with failure. So in summary, we'll just quickly go over some of Runway's top 5 tips for corporate startup engagement that we've discussed today. First, adopt the right mindset. Second, define your goals and objectives, making sure that they align with your business. Third, develop an appropriate engagement strategy that takes into account your goals and also your resources. Fourth, create an iterative, streamlined process, always learning from your mistakes and making adjustments when necessary. And fifth, leveraging proof of concepts to test experimental ideas. And that concludes our presentation. We will take any questions.
Awesome. Thank you, Erica. That was so much knowledge and really actionable tips that you had shared there with the group. And I know a lot of people are going to walk away with some new insights, and that was a marathon in terms of knowledge. So we'll definitely follow up with more about this. So Q&A. If you have any additional Q&A questions, feel free to throw them in the chat. One question that we often get is where do I start? So often coming from a business unit team, maybe there's no corporate innovation team or no corporate innovation function, or this is just a new idea that's being formed. Well, Erica answered a lot of these questions, or thinking about the strategy, right? So what do you actually want to achieve with your program, and what does innovation mean for this company? Right, there are so many different types of innovation programs out there where there's no cookie cutter example, right? There's no cookie cutter template. What we've put in front of you today is our general process that we adapt and adjust to each corporation that we hope is useful to you. Let's say start with strategy always, right? Start with the why and the goal in mind, and then think about who has the most likelihood to succeed. When you're thinking about internal corporate teams or corporate innovation teams like this, corporate strategy teams, you want to find an internal champion that can get some quick wins. Often these types of programs need to be able to have momentum to move forward, and you need to be able to find that champion who has enough innovation knowledge to pilot an innovation program and then get executive sponsorship or board sponsorship if it's not coming from the board itself. All right. Another question is, how is Runway different than some of the other programs out there? So Plug and Play and Techstars are mentioned here. So this question we get a lot, and it comes up quite a bit. So Runway, in its approach, we are a boutique innovation consulting company when it comes to how we engage open innovation. So, for example, Plug and Play is a company that has a lot of different industry programs and accelerated programs where you can join the program and have access to the deal flow and the conversations that is. They generally have, a handful of corporations to a dozen of corporations in any particular program. And this is most accelerators, where you join a program, you have access to the deal flow, the pipeline, the conversations, and you get to see the startups. They have wonderful demo days and very good types of productions around that. A lot of our customers have engaged Plug and Play, or maybe have looked at Plug and Play and found that it didn't actually fit their needs. What was missing is a lot of what Erica talked about today. What's missing is that engagement piece. How do you actually take a startup and get that to corporate value? So how do you take that in a way that has a systematic process where you can create and generate new corporate value? And that's what we do at Runway. So we act as a guide, or even an extension of the teams that we work with, and guide them through this process that we talked about. Mapping the right opportunity, identifying the right startups, testing that in proof of concepts, and then implementing that if it's successful, right? We often talked about there is a high failure rate, but we know that, and eventually we'll win. Being able to drive demonstrable value for the corporate teams is a big thing that we look at, and all of our programs are customized and specified to these specific needs. Often involves a bit of strategy and education at the beginning. Everyone needs to be on the same playing field. Everyone needs to have the same terminology. Executives never want to look as though they don't have some of the answers. So we provide that information and act as a really simple guide for a lot of the teams that we work with. So it's a great question. Thanks for asking that one. All right. Another question that we have and that we get a lot is, I'm planning my budget. What do I do to actually engage a startup? Why should I have a budget for startups? Shouldn't startups want to come to me and just offer me their services? Well, that's not necessarily the case, right? Remember, startups have to put food on the table too, and they need to be able to generate revenue. And very good startups are diligent with identifying opportunities for revenue and following through on that. It's in your benefit and their benefit that it's a paid proof of concept. And here's why. You both have skin in the game. So how much skin? That depends on the technology and the implementation, right? We recommend to a lot of our clients anywhere from $10,000 to $50,000 benchmark, depending on what kind of pilot or proof of concept program and the length of that we need to test, right? Things that require a lot more engineering, customization, technology, you might want to estimate a little bit higher within that spectrum. But the reason for needing skin in the game is that you both care then, right? At the end of the day, then something's on the line for both of you. Many times corporates that don't pay for programs let the startup fumble, and they often are walking around aimlessly in the sense of the partnership, and they're not sure the next step. So that's why it's important. All right, let's see here. All right. I think those are the time for questions. I want to talk a little bit about here at the end of what's next. What's next at Runway. Right? So as Erica mentioned, we have several exciting events coming up. We have a series of B2B pitch events at Runway. The next is November 18th. Manny had dropped the link in the chat there. So Manny's our awesome events lead at Runway. And this event is all about empowering the workforce. We'll have representatives from companies like Fujitsu, from JLL, corporations that are looking to engage startups that are thinking about how you reskill, retool, upskill, and increase the performance and efficiencies of human capital in this new era. And then we'll have a series after that of future pitch events talking about 5G, talking about also smart cities. And then in January, you're many of the first to hear this, we'll be doing an Open Innovation Summit January 20th and 21st. So stay tuned for that. You're all definitely invited. And that'll be focusing on the most pertinent and relevant innovation topics, in addition to 4 categories that we see that are hot right now in the industry and landscape. So we're very much so excited for that. In terms of Runway, if you have any questions or you want to engage us for an introduction conversation on how to start your corporate strategy, your corporate innovation program, feel free to reach out to us. My email is Tyler, Tyler, @runway.is, because Runway is awesome. And we'll be happy to set up a 15 to 30-minute conversation to talk through your program and what that could look like together. So as always, reach out to our company if you have any information or any questions that you think that we should know. We connect both corporates and startups together, so we work on both sides of the aisle there. Well, without further ado, I'll let you go with the remaining 3 minutes, and we hope that you have a lovely day. Appreciate your time. Have a good day.